Iran has been one of the countries that Israel has feared for decades, which is said to pose the greatest threat to them, and is even considered a strong enemy by the United States. Therefore, how strong is Iran that it is feared and considered a threat to Israel and the United States? To know Iran's true strength, we have to step back and cross the era so we can see how Iran was able to stand as one of the most influential countries in world geopolitics, especially in the Middle East region. In the 17th century AD, European countries began to explore Iran and exert their strong influence there, so that Iran began to lose some of its territory. The 19th century saw a new era change in Iran, when the Iranian constitutional revolution introduced a constitutional monarchy system. The king of Iran retained power, but a parliament called the Majlis Divai was established on October 7, 1906. After that, the discovery of crude oil in the Khuzestan region attracted the interests of Britain and Russia to expand their influence in Iran, so they could monopolize oil and even divide Iran. The two superpowers were in fierce competition. The Iranian government at that time was controlled by the weak Qajar dynasty. This situation eventually led to a rebellion by Reza Pahlavi, who finally succeeded in crowning himself as the Shah of Iran, or the new king of Iran, who then founded the Pahlavi dynasty. Before becoming king, Shah Reza was a skilled minister of war, possessed of extraordinary intelligence, and was highly respected even by his seniors. When King Ahmad of the Qajar dynasty was considered incompetent to manage the country because he was still too young, which caused the Iranian government to become chaotic and full of corruption cases, then the Iranian people urged that his position be replaced by Reza, who was still serving as a minister. Initially, Reza Pahlavi was only appointed prime minister, but then in 1925, he was appointed king to replace King Ahmad. During his reign, Shah Reza established an authoritarian government that prioritized the values of nationalism, militarism, secularism, and anti-communism, combined with strict censorship and state propaganda. Shah Reza really tried to modernize Iran during his rule, which lasted for almost 16 years, starting from 1925 to 1941. However, for some Iranian people at the time, Shah Reza's modernization efforts were considered too fast and merely a cover-up to cover up the oppression, corruption, and tax burdens he implemented through a police state-style security system, meaning his power was regulated through the power of the police force. Many new laws and regulations have given rise to a sense of injustice among Muslims and religious scholars. For example, mosques were required to install chairs. Men were required to dress in Western style, including wearing flat-brimmed hats. Women were encouraged to remove their hijabs, and most controversially, men and women were allowed to gather freely. The modern regulations made by Shah Reza, this eventually sparked tension and rebellion in 1935, when the villagers staged a rebellion inside the mosque in Mashhad. They shouted slogans such as, "Reza is the new Yazid." In Islam, the figure Yazid is known as a bad leader, and his position as caliph was not even recognized by some Muslim figures because he had violated the agreement and his lifestyle was also seen as inappropriate as a leader of the people. In the rebellion against Shah Reza, dozens of people were killed and hundreds injured, as army troops were sent to quell the unrest. Entering World War I, at that time Iran was already under the influence of Britain and Russia, even though the government's policy was still neutral. Before Shah Reza came to power, Britain tried to make Iran their puppet state, but the plan failed with Shah Reza's rise to power. Since the discovery of oil, Iran has been considered a major source of oil reserves for Allied countries. So when the Second World War broke out, the Allied forces asked Shah Reza to expel Germany, but he refused this request. So the Allied forces led by Britain finally worked together to launch an attack on Iran through the Anglo-Soviet invasion and overthrew Shah Reza through his son. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi succeeded his father as the new Shah Reza of Iran, but unlike his father, who was feared and respected, Shah Mohammad Reza was instead made a British puppet in the Iranian administration, which made him even more hated by the Iranian people. The chaos within the Iranian government led by Shah Mohammad Reza eventually gave birth to the Iranian revolutionary movement, also known as the Islamic Revolution. This was the revolution that transformed Iran from an absolute monarchy under the leadership of Shah Mohammad Reza into an Islamic Republic under the leadership of Ayatollah Khomeini, one of the figures who became the leader of the revolution and founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran. This revolution began in January 1978 with large demonstrations and only ended in December 1979. This means that the revolutionary movement lasted for almost 2 years until finally a new constitution was approved, which was theocratic, or prioritized divinity. Iran's new leader was also appointed by appointing Ayatollah Khomeini as supreme leader, while Mohammad Reza, who was ousted from power, left Iran in January 1979 after massive strikes and demonstrations that paralyzed the Iranian state. After Mohammad Reza left Iran on February 1, 1979, Ruhollah Khomeini was crowned as the new leader of Iran, welcomed by millions of people. Under the rule of Ayatollah Khomeini, Iran officially became the Islamic Republic of Iran on April 1, 1979, while the majority of the Iranian people approved its establishment through an international referendum. The ideology of the new government was known to be more pro-people, nationalist, and especially pro-Shia. The constitution is based on the concept of the territory of one faqih, the idea put forward by Khomeini that Muslims need guidance in the form of rules or supervision from Islamic scholars or a group of Islamic scholars as guides. Khomeini finally carried out his duties as a guiding cleric or great leader until he died in 1989. During Khomeini's leadership, Iran's rapidly growing capitalist economy was then replaced by an economic system and policies that were pro-people and Islamic in nature. Many industries were finally nationalized, laws and schools were Islamized, and Western influences were banned. In addition to domestic changes, Khomeini also broke off cooperation with Israel and started a war with Iraq, which cost a lot of money and resulted in many casualties. The war began in 1980 and lasted for 8 years, marked by the end of the war in August 1988. During the period to strengthen Iran's power under Khomeini's leadership, in 1982 to 1983, it was recorded that Iran succeeded in overcoming the destruction of the military economy and its government apparatus protests. And rebellions from various groups, including secular groups, left groups, and more traditional Muslim groups, were effectively suppressed by this new regime. Many oppositionists were eventually executed in the process. During this period, there were also rebellions by Marxist guerrillas and federalist groups in the regions of Khuzestan, Kurdistan, and Golbat Rufus. The rebellion, which began in April 1979, lasted for several months, but some also lasted for several years depending on the region. An example of a rebellion that continues to this day is the Kurdish rebellion led by the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan, where the rebellion was the bloodiest rebellion and lasted until 1983, claiming 10,000 lives. Apart from the problem of rebellion, one of the early events in the history of the founding of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which had a long-lasting impact, was the hostage crisis. This incident was triggered by the acceptance of the former Shah of Iran into the United States to undergo cancer treatment, so that on November 4, 1979, Iranian students finally took the United States Embassy personnel hostage and labeled the embassy as a nest of spies. It was recorded that there were 52 people on Sandra for 444 days until January 1981, when the American military attempted a rescue, but it ended in failure. The hostage incident was very popular in Iran, where thousands of people gathered to support the hostage takers, and the incident also made Khomeini even more famous and was able to gather the anti-Americanist front in Iran. Since that incident, Khomeini called America the Great Devil, and America, the incident was considered a violation of the old principle of international law, which stipulates that diplomats may be expelled from a country in conflict, but not from Sandra. The event created a large anti-Iran backlash movement in the United States. Relations between the two countries remain characterized by hostility to this day, and American international sanctions have hampered Iran's economy for a long time. The hostage-taking not only led to an economic crisis, but also created a political and social crisis in Iran. This situation was seen by Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi leader who was in power at that time, as an opportunity to take advantage of the chaos caused by the Islamic Revolution and Iran's military weakness. Before this incident, the Iranian military was known to be very strong by the world, but during the revolution, its military strength was destroyed due to internal strife and the fall of Shah Reza as a respected person in the Iranian military world. Saddam Hussein was ambitious to establish himself as the new strongman in the Middle East and sought to expand Iraq's access to the Persian Gulf by seizing territories that Iraq had previously demanded from Iran during the Shah's reign. The region most targeted by Saddam Hussein, which was considered important for the Iraqi state, was the Khuzestan region, which not only had a substantial Arab population, but also had very rich oil fields. With such great ambition, Saddam Hussein finally launched a large-scale attack on Iran while saying the Iraqi armed forces could reach the capital of Iran in just 3 days. This attack began on September 22, 1980, with the Iraqi army invading the Khuzestan region, thus sparking the Iran-Iraq War. The attack carried out by Saddam Hussein really surprised Khomeini and all the Iranian people who were busy with the wave of revolution. However, even though the armed forces mobilized by Saddam Hussein dominated the battle at the beginning of the war, it turned out that the Iranian military was able to push back the Iraqi army so that it returned to its country. When it was almost 1982, seeing how much military power was possessed, Khomeini actually had a plan to bring his Islamic revolution to Iraq, especially for the majority of Shiite Arabs living in Iraq, so that the Iran-Iraq War, which should have ended, actually continued for another 6 years. This war, which caused many losses on both sides, only truly ended in 1988 with a ceasefire agreement brokered by the UN. The war between Iran and Iraq was considered to have violated the established rules of war. Because Iraq used chemical weapons in their war, millions of lives consisting of military personnel and civilians lost their lives on the battlefield. The total number of war casualties on the Iranian side alone is estimated at 500,000 to 1 million people. Iraq did not give up because it was still supported by many other countries. It is known that during the war, Iraq was financially supported by Egypt, the Arab countries in the Persian Gulf, the Soviet Union, and the Warsaw Pact countries. Then there was the United States, France, Germany, England, Brazil, and China, although China also sold weapons to Iran during the international hearing. Almost all international representatives confirmed that Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons to cripple the sea of people from Iran, as they also later testified that Iran never used chemical weapons during the war. After the ceasefire with Iraq, Iran's focus shifted back to its own country and finally began to systematically execute thousands of political prisoners throughout Iran since July 19, 1988. This execution of political prisoners is also known as the 1988 Iranian massacre. In historical records, the main targets of the execution were members of the Iranian People's Mujahideen organization, and there were a small number of political orders from left groups such as the Iranian Tudeh Party as one of the Iranian Communist parties, which was also the main target of the execution. The estimated number of victims of this mass execution reached 1,400 to 30,000 people. After many major events occurred, Iran began to look somewhat stable under Khomeini's leadership. But before his death in 1989, Khomeini finally appointed 25 trusted people as members of the Constitutional Reform Assembly, which then appointed Ali Ayatollah Khamenei, who was then serving as president of Iran, to become the next great leader of Iran, and at the same time made a number of changes to the Iranian constitution. This transfer of power went without any problems at all, even though Ali did not have the strong charisma of Khomeini. He had a strong support system in the armed forces and Iran's charitable foundations, which were economically very strong to support him. But under his rule, the Iranian regime was said to be seen as a clerical oligarchy rather than a theocratic constitution. Meanwhile, Ali's replacement in the presidential chair was a pragmatic conservative figure named Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, who served for 2 terms.
Ali Akbar had a quite different policy by focusing his attention on rebuilding the economy and infrastructure destroyed by the war. Of course, he has the challenge of turning Iran into a more orderly country. This challenge mainly came from the economic aspect, which at that time was experiencing obstacles, especially with the low world oil prices at that time, even though the largest contributor to state revenue for Iran was its oil products. In the hands of Ali Akbar's regime, he succeeded in controlling the population with birth control. Then he cut military spending, which was previously the largest expenditure incurred by the country, and culminated in normalizing diplomatic relations with neighboring countries such as Saudi Arabia. He also tried to keep Iran neutral during the outbreak of the Persian Gulf War in 1991 in order to maintain the stability of his country first. Ali Akbar did indeed appear to be inclined to maintain peace and uphold humanitarian values in his country. This was proven by his efforts to limit acts of condemnation against the United States and allowing airplanes and refugees from Iraq to enter his territory during the war.
Ali Akbar's reign was considered a calm period for Iran before they finally felt tension again when Ali Akbar was replaced by an Iranian reform figure named Mohammad Khatami, who took office in 1997. At the beginning of his term, tension was already marked because his reform-minded government was quite contrary to the local clerics and over time became increasingly conservative. This tension peaked in July 1999 with large-scale protests and demonstrations by the anti-government movement that broke out in Tehran for a full week. The protests were only successfully dispersed after the police and pro-government civil servants intervened to disperse the crowd. What was unexpected was that in the next Iranian presidential election, Mohammad Khatami was re-elected as president in the June 2001 election, unfortunately not as freely as before, after serving for a second term. Now, every reform movement initiated by him is always hampered and weakened by conservative circles in parliament. The way they weaken it is by destroying liberal newspapers and disqualifying pro-reform parliamentary candidates when they register. As a result of this action, the young generation of Iran eventually develop an attitude and a sense of indifference towards their country's politics. Even though Iran's internal conditions are full of conflict, this country is one of the strongest countries in the world, especially in the Middle East region. Several sources have mentioned Iran as a major actor in the Middle East region, with a huge influence in the conflicts occurring in Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon. This is actually not surprising if we look again at the long history of civilization in Iran, which was once the center of regional power in the Middle East, with a territory extending to 3 continents. This power seems to have not completely faded, especially with the fact that Iran is still one of the countries with the highest military power. The annual statistical index issued by the Global Firepower Organization, which provides information on the military strength of various countries, shows that Iran is still ranked 14th out of 145 countries with the highest military strength. Iran's score is almost perfect, influenced by the number of military units, finances, capabilities, logistics, and geography. Judging from these factors, Iran is considered to be very superior in the Middle East, especially since Iran is the country that is most generous in spending state funds on military affairs, so of course, in terms of the finances of military units and their logistical capabilities, they are quite well maintained. The Iranian armed forces alone are among the largest in the Middle East, with a record of 580,000 active personnel and 200,000 trained reserve personnel divided among the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, or IRGC. Plus, Iran is known to have one of the largest ballistic missile and drone arsenals in the Middle East, which includes cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, and ballistic missiles with a range of up to 2,000 kilometers. This missile has the capacity and range to reach any target in the Middle East, including Israel. All of these weapons are Iran's own creations, which they also traded with Russia in their attacks on Ukraine. If it were not for the international sanctions imposed on Iran due to a number of accusations and actions of its involvement several decades ago, perhaps Iran could actually build a much larger and stronger military force than it is now, reawakening its power as the strongest country and respected even by Western countries. Moreover, Iran is an independent country, meaning that Iran has rejected foreign interference, especially from the West, in its country or regional areas. If it is military or political interference, this has been happening and even peaked since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Iran has been very consistent in rejecting the military interference of Western countries, especially the United States, in the Middle East region, and even criticizes their interference in other countries. On the other hand, Iran also frequently intervenes in other countries, especially through support for groups or allies in the region, for example, supporting Shia groups in Iraq. Regarding the current conflict between Iran and Israel, it is important to know and remember that Iran's attack was a form of retaliation for the attack on Tehran and not to interfere in Palestinian affairs. Iran and Israel themselves have been enemies since 1979, when the Islamic Revolution occurred previously. The two parties were allies during the reign of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who was pro-Western, and later Iran became the second country to recognize the establishment of the State of Israel after Egypt. However, during the Khomeini era, hostility between Iran and Israel emerged. The reason is the ideology in which Iranian leaders believe and consider Israel as an occupier who has been proven to oppress the Palestinian people. The Iranian rulers even consider that Israel has no right to exist and call Israel the little devil. Then its ally, the United States, is called the big devil. Iran wants Israel and the United States to disappear from the Middle East, even though Iran has not previously launched any attacks on Israel, which has completely attacked Palestine, because perhaps there is no reason or there is no benefit to be gained from the attack. Only from several sources, even though it does not help directly, Iran is considered to support the Resistance Axis network consisting of armed groups in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen.
Currently, conditions in the Middle East are still heating up, and some military observers are worried that there will be a large-scale attack that has so far been suppressed by the two countries.